effect on others. For instance, there's often vast amounts of litter in the car park area whenever at the end of a weekend when they've been there. But I think that's symptomatic of perhaps that motorsport ethic where it's all noise and loudness and no consideration for, they want to do their thing. It's a sort of a boy racer type attitude.
Yeah.
And once again, I hate to generalise because I'm sure there are good people out there. What I hope really is that the good people, speak to those that aren't considerate, that do break the law. For instance, the incident up on the beach with the vehicle, and control them, because if it keeps going, perhaps as a society our only option is to regulate somehow.
The problem with speaking to those people, as we found out from your anecdote, the anecdote from Murray yesterday, the example, perhaps, although we don't know all the details of what happened on the Waiuku beach, the problem with remonstrating with them is that you run a big risk of being attacked yourself, obviously.
Yes. When I spoke to the police, they actually said that. They said, look, don't approach these people. It's too dangerous. The woman I spoke to even said, we've had incidences like this in the past. Just call us. So, but I mean, we need to have more resources with police, obviously, so that they can come when the incident is happening.
No, exactly. Gary, thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate you contacting us and letting us know. Yeah, that's the obvious. Well, it's not a fallacy, and don't call us, but there aren't enough of them.
Yeah, I know. But doesn't it make you sick? I mean, the beach is basically the Kiwi church. For that kind of stuff to happen, in a place that people love to be with their children, just makes me so sick.
But you think about it. This is awful, but we've got so many angry people in our society. You see, even at the beach, the way sometimes parents will take on their own children if they've done something wrong. The way they sort of shout and scream at them. We seem to just have this group of people, I don't know if it's generational or whatever, that are out there, out of control and permanently angry. And it's all very well being told, contact the police. If the police aren't going to do anything, that's almost the classic two-finger salute.
Because that story really does sound like an absolutely irrational rage, doesn't it?
Yeah. I had a case in Central Wellington just a few days ago of some guy who crossed the road in front of me against a red light, then becoming extremely abusive for his own mistake.
The well-known, I know people. The well-known artist, Donovan Bixley, the well-known artist, emailed us. He said, "Jim, racing cars on our beaches isn't just a boy racer issue. It's an issue of selfish, stupid New Zealanders who feel that they need to take their cars down onto our beaches and drive at high speed. It's a problem at Ohiwa Beach in the Bay of Plenty over the summer, even more so as the beach is supposed to be off limits to protect the fragile dotterel and godwit breeding places." And Donovan wasn't the only person to write and say that people tearing across beaches are endangering our supposedly precious fauna. So it can have disastrous results in all sorts of ways. Anyway, the music is playing, and that's the end of the panel for a week. Peter Dunn, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Lisa.
Nice to have your company.
Lovely to talk to you.
Likewise.
Lisa, thank you so much again.
You're welcome.
We are back on Monday. Thanks for your company, everybody. Have a lovely weekend. John Campbell's coming up with Checkpoint.
Kia ora everyone, tonight on Checkpoint, blood-stained sheets, broken toilets, roaming dogs and a filthy green unusable pool with a gate tied together with a shoelace. Why is this interesting? Well, it's the Far North Motel former residents describe as Mohel, and Wins is paying for people to be in it. Plus, the Nigel Murray fiasco widens. Now one of his pet projects, a multi-million-dollar smart health app, is under investigation. The Southern DHB reveals 24 people have been confirmed as having cancer following a weekend super clinic. The Finance Minister indicates some programs may need to be changed or cut if the government is to meet its financial targets and promises. And one Cromwell orchard picks apricots in November for the first time in 103 years. That's how hot it is there.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. Fonterra Chair John Wilson is angry and disappointed over an international tribunal's ruling on the 2013 botulism scare that will cost the dairy company $183 million. The Singapore-based arbitration body backed the French food giant Danone's claim for compensation for damage to its business and lost earnings following Fonterra's recall of some dairy products, which was later found to be a false alarm. Our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports.
The $183 million is much less than Danone had been seeking, but Mr Wilson says it is not the outcome he had been expecting. Fonterra has now cut its earnings forecast range by 10 cents a share, though it left the milk price, which its farmers depend upon, untouched. But Danone may not be finished yet. It is suing Fonterra in the High Court and has yet to confirm whether it will pursue that claim. This is Patrick O'Mara.
Senior doctors are accusing the Waikato District Health Board of wasting $15 million on a smartphone app. The comment follows new developments on the spending scandal engulfing the DHB. The State Services Commissioner, Peter Hughes, has asked the Auditor-General to inquire into a DHB initiative which involved it paying $14.6 million to trial the American-produced HealthTap mobile phone app. An Audit New Zealand review of the process, released separately, raised concerns including over a lack of open tendering. Ian Powell of the Senior Doctors Union says the findings are damning.
This poor outcome has cost the District Health Board, has cost patients and taxpayers $15 million wasted on a product that was never designed for the needs of the DHB.
Ian Powell. The DHB says the money spent on HealthTap has not been wasted. A war of words has broken out between the Race Relations Commissioner and the Deputy Prime Minister over comments she made at a sports awards function last night. Dame Susan Devoy told the audience Winston Peters was obnoxious and had once given a speech in which he described her as being a bit on the round side and probably in need of a long walk. Mr Peters says that's not correct.
I said that she was an exceptional sports person because she could win when she wasn't fit against the best in the world.
Winston Peters says Dame Susan's memory is failing her. A strong earthquake has struck the northeast coast of Papua New Guinea, but no tsunami warning has been issued. The magnitude 6 quake was at a depth of about 53 kilometres. Another quake, also measuring 6, has hit eastern Iran near the city of Kerman. The United States Geological Survey says it was very shallow at a depth of 10 kilometres, which would have amplified the shaking. And in a rare event for America's northeast coast, a 4.1 earthquake has struck in the state of Delaware. Teenage girls have told researchers they consider it normal to be sent unwanted nude pictures of males and part of being a woman online. Researchers from the Ministry for Women and Internet Safety Group NetSafe interviewed 16 and 17-year-olds at secondary schools around the country. The Minister for Women, Julianne Genter, says the report finds all of the teenagers knew someone who had been badly affected by something online.
For example, girls being asked by boys for nude photos, and many girls have received dick pics.
Julianne Genter is encouraging parents to educate themselves and to discuss healthy relationships and online safety with their children. In the United States, outraged Garrison Keillor fans have deluged Minnesota Public Radio with complaints following the firing of the radio presenter and author over an allegation of workplace misconduct. Some say they will no longer support NPR, one of the largest public radio operations in the United States. NPR announced yesterday it was cutting ties with Keillor, the creator and former host of the popular public radio show A Prairie Home Companion, over the misconduct complaint. The network did not give details, but Keillor told the Minneapolis Star-Tribune he had put his hand on a woman's bare back while trying to console her. NPR says it's received just one formal complaint against Keillor a day after a statement by him raised questions about the extent of the allegations. It's 5:04. To sport, and the New Zealand opener Tom Latham is leading the Black Caps charge as they settle into their first innings of the first cricket test against the West Indies in Wellington. A short time ago, Latham was on 32 while his partner Jeet Raval was on 17. The Black Caps are 50 without loss, behind the West Indies' first innings total of 134. Earlier, New Zealand pace bowler Neil Wagner ripped through the visitors' batting order, taking career best figures of 7 for 39. Meanwhile, Australia have named an unchanged side for the second cricket test against England starting tomorrow in Adelaide. Australia won the first test in Brisbane by 10 wickets. The New Zealand Breakers coach Paul Henare says his side's 9-game winning streak means nothing unless they keep improving. The Breakers lead the Australian National Basketball League with only one loss this season, but face second-placed Perth in Auckland tonight. Henare says his players are refreshed following their recent break for the international window and has challenged them to keep pushing for perfection.
Even though we've been able to get the wins, we're finding ways to improve and continue to get better at, so that's a good place to be. But one thing I think these guys have a pretty good grasp on is it's been a good start, but that's all it is, it's a start, so we've got to make sure we try and keep that momentum and keep playing at a high level.
Breakers coach Paul Henare. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life samples some goat's cheese after 9 and meet some of the goats supplying the raw material. We look forward to the next breast thing. This weekend's roller derby in Palmerston North, raising money for cancer research, in which the itty bitty titties take on the over-the-shoulder bowlers, which will go nicely with a sonic tonic dedicated to sport. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, kicking off after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland, except South Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty, cloudy periods with isolated showers. South Auckland to Whanganui, including the central high country, scattered showers mainly during the afternoons and evenings, some thundery with localised downpours and hail. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine apart from afternoon and evening showers about the ranges, some possibly thundery. Manawatu to Wellington, mainly fine, isolated showers about the ranges today, cloudy periods tomorrow morning and evening with drizzle possible. Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine, isolated afternoon and evening showers, mostly about the ranges where they could be thundery today. Buller and Westland, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Fiordland, patchy drizzle. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, isolated showers today, mainly inland, some heavy and possibly thundery about Otago. Fine tomorrow, but some cloud about Stewart Island. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's 5:07, and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina Batten. We've got a great show tonight. The Waikato DHB, the Southern DHB, Fonterra, myrtle rust, and much, much more. A very busy program for a Friday. We begin in the far north, where young mums and their children facing homelessness say work and income is paying for them to live at a local motel which should not be operating, let alone housing children at the taxpayers' expense. A severe housing shortage in the far north means some families are taking whatever accommodation they can get. But at the Awanui Motel near Kaitaia, that means putting up with blood-stained sheets, broken toilets, roaming dogs, and what guests have described as filthy facilities. Our camerawoman Claire Easton-Farrelly and our reporter Nita Blake-Person went north.
It's been dubbed the Mohel by the women who've stayed there. Tash Williams says it was the shoelace that secured the gate to the green swimming pool that worried her the most, but sewage flowing back up the toilets and roaming dogs were also a worry for her and her 17-month-old son.
It was horrific. There was blood stains on the sheets. Blankets had just been pulled over what looked like the last tenant's sheets, and just there was black mould everywhere. There was a dog with dog bones and mattresses ripped up in the laundry. There was a communal kitchen that I can't even describe in words because I don't know how people live. I've never met people that live like that.
She was 8 months pregnant when she ended up at the Awanui Motel and Hotel earlier this year. She'd been living with whānau but wanted a place of her own and hadn't managed to find a private rental despite trying for more than a year. Ms Williams eventually contacted Work and Income, who suggested she stay at the Awanui Motel.
We were told that if we refused their emergency accommodation, that we would not be put on the list for a Housing New Zealand house for our son.
She says there were several young mothers who were at the motel with their children.
Work and Income would send young mothers with their children there, and within 2 days they had moved out and gone back to Winds and said, I am not staying there, and they would be housed in motel accommodation.
But Ms Williams says Work and Income told her there was nowhere else they could send her. It took 3 months before a Housing New Zealand home in Whangarei became available. Despite being away from friends and family, Ms Williams took it immediately to get out of the Awanui Motel.
I don't ever want to see children living there. Again, I in fact think that the whole thing needs to be smashed down. It needs to be rebuilt.
Work and Income paid $250 a week for Ms Williams to stay at the Awanui, and she says she owes them the $520 bond that the motel never repaid. Adrienne Morrison and her 14-year-old son ended up at the motel after she left her abusive partner. She says there were limited options available to them on the benefit, and Work and Income paid for her to stay at the Awanui. She describes it as a disgusting dump.
The fridge in the kitchen was just completely dedicated to dog food. It was disgusting and stunk. Not many people really used the kitchen because it really was disgusting. I mean, no one has done any cleaning for years there. The laundry was really dangerous, I thought. It was, not only was it filthy and disgusting, everything was falling to pieces and even the roof was caving in. And I just thought, this is really dangerous for children. And the swimming pool, that was green, and it had sort of very broken down fences around it. Although there wasn't big gaps, but children could get through. You know, toddlers could get through. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe this place. You know, what's going on here?
Ms Morrison says she was bullied and evicted from the motel when she raised her concerns 4 days into her stay. She believes many other people who have stayed there are too afraid to speak out. She complained to the Far North District Council about the state of things around a month ago. They sent staff to investigate last week, and a report into the motel out today said it was compliant with their standards. When we visited the Awanui motel this week, neither the owners nor staff were interested in talking to us.
Oh, no, I'm not interested. It's blobbing over. I don't want to know nothing. Thank you.
With the cameras off, they let us into the room where Adrienne Morrison had been staying. There was dirt on the beds and old furniture scattered across the car park. They were confident of the motel's condition and said they'd had inquiries from Work and Income that day to check on availability. The Far North District Council sent staff to investigate the motel last week following a complaint. They found issues with access to the pool and had concerns about food hygiene in the communal kitchen, including dog food contaminating the communal fridge. They have until next Tuesday to remediate the issues. The council said it did not enter any of the motel's rooms as they were not part of their inspection.
So, can we have a look at what on the rooms, what they look like?
He Quarter-Wide Trust Chief Executive Ricky Houghton has been working to find housing solutions in the Far North. He's called for a state of emergency to be declared over the housing shortage there.
The reason why I called for a state of emergency was because of things like this.
He says the community is in crisis.
It is going to get to the stage where we are on the verge of civil disobedience if we don't get the help that we so desperately deserve.
Mr Houghton says emergency accommodation and housing whānau in private rentals does not deal with the problem, but shifts it to another generation. He says the government needs to support whānau returning to their ancestral land and their own homes in the Far North. In a statement, Work and Income said the Awanui Motel was not a contracted provider, and while it was aware there was limited commercial accommodation options in the area, it did not actively refer clients there. It said of the 25 emergency housing special needs grants made in Kaitaia in the 3 months to September, less than 5 were for the Awanui Motel. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake person ahau.
13 minutes past 5. In a week in which the chairman of the board at the Waikato DHB has stood down, the Audit NZ report into the overspending of the DHB's former CEO has been made public, and an acting chair and acting CEO have turned to face the future. It might have seemed as if there were no more skeletons to be found in that particular public health closet, but there was one. It's called Health Tap. It was a pet IT project of Dr. Nigel Murray during his time as CEO, and there are now so many questions around it that it too is to be the subject of a high-level investigation which will liaise with the Serious Fraud Office. What's going on here? Here's our health correspondent, Karen Brown.
Health Tap is an online platform and mobile app that enables people to talk to a doctor on their smartphone using the internet. It was a top priority for Dr. Murray, who resigned in October after spending $218,000 during 3 years on the job. Prominent in his spending were visits to IT firm Health Tap in the US, including travel worth about $20,000 in late 2015, early 2016. The State Services Commissioner, Peter Hughes, today asked the Auditor General to inquire into the DHB's Smart Health product and the procurement process for Health Tap. Mr Hughes would not be interviewed but issued a statement.
It is the latest development in my investigation, at the Ministry of Health's request, into allegations of wrongful expenditure of public money by former Waikato District Health Board Chief Executive Dr. Nigel Murray.
The other Commission-led investigation underway by John Ombler continues, but Mr Hughes said in view of the fact Audit New Zealand has been looking at the topic, it is best placed to continue. Today, the DHB released a new Audit Office report into the HealthTap IT project. It says a 2-year trial of the app has cost the DHB $14.6 million, adding it has major concerns about procurement for the project. They include that there was no request for proposal or open tendering and that a 2-year trial with a single provider could be unfair. Audit New Zealand added it could not see how the board could show value for money after the trial without having tested the market first. The Executive Director of the Senior Doctors Union, Ian Powell, says the comments are damning.
This poor outcome has cost the District Health Board, has cost patients and taxpayers $15 million wasted on a product that was never designed for the needs of the DHB.
He says the DHB under Nigel Murray should have spoken to doctors before going ahead.
And if they'd engaged with senior doctors and sought their advice over the viability of this device, then they would have been learnt that it was not applicable to local circumstances.
GP John McCaskill-Smith of the Pinnacle Midlands Health Network says they were sidelined by Dr Murray and the former board chair Bob Simcock, who wanted Smart Health and HealthTap.
They were trying to gain a New Zealand licence to put themselves in a position where they could on-sell the product to other places around New Zealand, other district health boards and other parts of the health sector, and that seemed to blur their view of whether or not it was improving people's health, and it seemed to become more about a commercial manoeuvre for them.
For his part, the DHB's acting chief executive, Derek Wright, says he welcomes the audit inquiry ordered by the Commission. He also says he accepts the criticisms of auditors in the report released by the DHB today.
If we were doing this again today, so under my watch, we would be doing it completely differently. We would be going out for a request for proposal, which I would have done then as well. Even if I thought that there was only one system out there, I would have gone out with a request for proposal to see what else was out there in the market.
But Mr Wright said he does not believe the spending on HealthTap was wasted, as the DHB has learnt a lot from the exercise. Mō te hotaka o te ahi ahi ko Karen Brown tēnei.
Of course, earlier this week, the chair of the DHB's board, Bob Simcock, resigned. That was over the expenses of Dr Nigel Murray, who Mr Simcock said he'd watched closely when he was appointed, despite warnings and objections back in 2014. Now, earlier today, I spoke to the new Health Minister, David Clark, who says it was the right thing for Bob Simcock to resign.
Look, the situation was such that the chief executive had spent money which appears to have been spent in a way that was not consistent with the policies of the organisation. And there's a pattern of behaviour there which I think all New Zealanders would be concerned about. And the question of oversight has been raised in public. In the circumstances, I think Mr Simcock made the right decision.
Clearly oversight is the issue. And the timeline is confusing on this front. The Minister first learnt there were concerns about Dr Murray's spending on the 12th of June. 16 days later, on the 28th of June, there was a board meeting in which the board wasn't told. So the Minister knew, the Chairman knew, but the board wasn't brought into the loop. Have you any idea why the lid was being kept on this?
Look, John, the report has raised some very concerning issues for me if I look at the Audit New Zealand report. And before that, already I had instructed the SSC to go in, and I welcome further investigations.
So the SSC, the State Services Commission, is obviously looking at what was happening at Waikato, but this was such unconventional governance. Is this an aberration, the fact that weeks passed before the board was informed of the situation? As the new Health Minister, are you looking at other DHBs? You're obviously talking to them.
Yes, I'm 4 weeks into the job, but I've made it clear already that I have very high expectations of the DHB chairs in terms of their performance and commitment to the new government's goals and aspirations in the health sector. We want to have a greater emphasis on equity of outcomes. We want to have a greater emphasis on a strong public system of healthcare. We want more emphasis on primary care, and mental health is a real priority for us. So I've made that clear to the board chairs. I've met with all of them pretty much and I have also started making my way around the DHBs to have a look at their individual situations. So there's been a real effort on my part to communicate with them, to be clear on expectations, and I have to say that's been welcomed. And what I need out of those board chairs is people who have good governance skills and that commitment to transparency and to the priorities of the new government. And I have received assurances from the chairs that that is what they intend to do.
So you've been around meeting them. Is it your expectation that those who are in the position now will remain in the position, or will we see other chairs go, do you think?
Look, John, I want to retain those who are implementing the policies and priorities of the new government and behaving in a way that is transparent and is all about public service. And my observation so far is that the chairs are committed to that as a group. Obviously, if I discover otherwise, I'll start having conversations with them.
Can we talk about the financial health of the country's 20 DHBs? Have you a sense of what their overall deficit is? We haven't seen a DHB sector financial report filed since June, which is an unusually long time to not get that kind of update. Where are they at, do you think?
Yes, John, I mean, this was a big concern coming into the role. It is incredibly unusual, the situation we find ourselves in this year. The DHBs themselves didn't have finalised budgets until 2 weeks before the financial year began in terms of how much money they were getting from the government. And that history of errors and unfortunate lack of oversight by the previous health minister is well documented. I don't want to talk too much about that. I've got to get on with the job of what comes next. But it's put those DHBs in a difficult position because they're months behind on their planning, and the deficit expectations have been growing the whole time because they haven't had the certainty, and also after 9 years of being squeezed under the previous government, there's not many more efficiency gains that can be made easily without further investment. So I'm expecting, and this hasn't been made public before, I don't think, deficits currently are projected north of 150 million. May was the last time I think we had an official figure of 47.5 million. There may have been one announcement in between as I think you were challenging the previous health minister on rising debt levels, but fair to say during that period of planning, which was delayed, they've risen by quite an extraordinary amount. And I'll be looking to finalise those arrangements so that we've got some accountability with the sector. For the DHBs, it's hard because they're running contracts and maintaining contracts without the financial certainty, and in many cases they're billion-dollar-plus businesses. It's very hard to imagine this kind of thing happening in the private sector. In fact, even in the public sector, it's pretty unusual not to have your budgets in place 5 months into the year.
Does that mean their annual plans haven't been signed off on? Where are you at with that?
Yeah, well, not one of them had been signed off on, John, when I took the reins as Minister of Health. And now, of course, the job of scrutinising them falls to me.
Not one. Not one had been signed off on.
Not one single DHB had their annual plan signed off. Not one single one. And I find that I just find that neglectful. It sadly aligns with the priority the previous government placed on health, but it also points to the incredible difficulty in relationships that was evident with the government previously, where those DHBs were increasingly in a struggle with the centre, and I've let the centre, the Ministry of Health, know I have a very high expectation of their relationship management and performance management, and also with that comes an expectations that the DHBs also will step up and develop good relationships and improve their performance as well.
Just to clarify, these are annual plans for the 17-18 financial year?
These are the financial plans for the 17-18 financial year.
And we are in the 17-18 financial year?
We're 5 months into the 17-18
and none
financial
of them
year.
And none of them have been signed off on?
And not one of them has been signed off on. And so, that's going to mean necessarily that we're burning the midnight oil to get this work through, to make sure that next year the planning processes are better and that we can get on with making sure that funding is going into the health sector as we've promised in our election commitments, so that we can make sure that New Zealanders get the services they expect. It will take time, of course, to address 9 years of neglect, but we're determined to get on with it.
David Clark talking to us earlier. So the combined deficit north of 150 million, that's probably at its highest level in roughly a decade, and none of the financial plans for the 17-18 year signed off on yet. 5:25. Meanwhile, 24 people in Dunedin have been told they have cancer after getting long-awaited biopsies in a weekend super clinic run by the Southern DHB. Remember, we've been looking at this afternoon. Chief Medical Officer Dr Nigel Miller admitted these people have waited too long and it's simply not good enough. He says if they hadn't had the super clinic, they would have had real trouble even clearing the backlog of patients in the short to medium term who've waited too long for a diagnosis and treatment.
The patients who ended up coming to the super clinic were the ones we didn't manage to deal with first. And of course, we tried to find the ones who we thought were at highest risk. But it's quite clear that we would have been a long time trying to get up with things if we hadn't had the great help and support of urologists from around the country.
So 24 people with cancer would have waited longer, and in some cases a lot longer, for diagnosis.
That would seem likely where we'd be without that additional help to catch up.
How long had they waited for the super clinic in some cases?
I can't give you the exact precise figures, but they waited longer than they should have, which is, the most important thing. It was too long, and we would greatly regret that. And it's our determination not to have this build up again or things to go this bad.
In what way is this good enough?
I don't think it is good enough. I don't think I would ever like this to be acceptable levels of care. It's below an acceptable standard, and I think we have to acknowledge that.
This is the public health system, and it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, what do you feel about this?
Oh, very unhappy, disappointed, sick at times that we find ourselves in this position of not been able, or actually not achieving what we ought to achieve in terms of the quality of care.
What you are saying is people have been really let down.
Yes, that's entirely correct, and I think that's the dreadful thing. A real slur on the district health board that we've let people down. Absolutely, and our first response to that obviously is to do our very best as quickly as possible to correct it for those people.
Is that enough?
And then. Well, no, and then we need to get on and correct the system so it doesn't happen again.
And what do you say to those people? What do you say to the people who waited longer than they should have waited in the public health system for a cancer diagnosis?
Well, we're really sorry that the district health boards failed them and the people of Otago and Southland, that we haven't met the appropriate standards and people's care has been delayed.
Where does the buck stop for this? I know we've had these conversations before with the Southern DHB, but you are so prepared to admit fault and you are so prepared to say it isn't good enough. But the CEO is still in his job, you are still in your job, all the people involved in the urology department are still in their job, the commissioner is still in their job. In other words, there seems to me to be a disparity between the buck actually stopping anywhere and the rhetorical admission of fault.
Well, John, I don't think I count my admission of fault as rhetorical. It's real. I think we had this discussion before. You asked me, was I going to resign? And I think my answer was, well, I would if I thought that would make things better. It would improve things. We'd get it fixed quicker. I feel a responsibility to, take a hand in sorting this out. It may be that somebody later says that what I've done or what somebody else has done not good enough, in which case there may be consequences. I think my focus at the moment is actually doing our best to resolve this for the people who've been affected.
Dr Nigel Miller, who is the Chief Medical Officer for the Southern DHB. 5:29. Let's stay in Otago. The central Otago township of Cromwell has seen spring heat records smashed, with the rising mercury ripening apricots so early they've been harvested from one orchard in November for the first time in a century. While the nearby town of Roxburgh has suffered flash flooding, of course, Cromwell, dubbed the Fruit Bowl of the South, has been basking in hot, dry weather. Our Otago Southern reporter Timothy Brown has the story.
Heart of the desert, a sign claims in the settlement of Bannockburn, just out of Cromwell. It's certainly proving to be true this year, despite summer only officially starting today. NIWA meteorologist Ben Knoll says last month was the warmest November on record, with the town notching up a mean air temperature of 24.9 degrees Celsius, 4.6 degrees higher than average.
Cromwell has been very hot and dry this November. We've had a big ridge of high pressure over much of New Zealand, and Cromwell has been the epicenter of this very warm conditions. In fact, it reached 33.3, which was the warmest spring temperature on record.
Ben Knoll says those aren't the only records to tumble in the township, as spring featured the most 30-degree plus days ever, with 4, and November also had the most 25-degree plus days in its recorded history. That has been great news for orchardists, and Summerfruit New Zealand's chairman, Tim Jones, is predicting a bumper season for exporters.
Early stages, but I think the crop is hanging on trees for us to have a record year. The industry produced about 3,400 tonnes of export fruit in the last season, and I think if all things go well, we should exceed 4,000 tonnes this year, so quite a step up and would be a record for us.
Tim Jones says orchardists are seeing fruit coming in 10 to 14 days ahead of schedule. He says 2 apricot crops will be picked this year, one in January and one this month, which is very unusual. And for one Cromwell orchard, the weather has meant an unprecedented event, apricots in November. Webb's fruit owner, Simon Webb, says a new, earlier ripening variety of apricot being trialled at his orchard is already being picked, the first time the fruit has come off trees in November in the orchard's 100-year history.
We've had some years that our earliest apricots aren't coming off until mid to late December down in central Otago, so to have them coming off in November is extreme.
Simon Webb says the weather has not only impacted crop picking times, but their quality too.
The heat makes the summer fruit eat better, so the consumers are going to get a good sized piece of fruit that's going to be delicious, really. You know, what we're eating off the trees right now is just beautiful.
But a long, hot, dry summer isn't good news for all the town's industries. NIWA's Ben Knoll says stock and other crops will suffer if the heat and dry continues.
Plants are reaching their wilting point in some locations. So we are at some critical levels in terms of soil moisture, very low soil moisture across much of the South Island.
Mr. Knoll says this year's summer may be one of the toughest for farmers.
Certainly from an agricultural perspective, this may be difficult. Believe it or not, we've seen patterns like this before in years such as 2010, 2007, but we've seemingly turned it up a notch. Things are just warmer this go around than those previous years I mentioned.
And that may also spell trouble for firefighters. Cromwell Volunteer Fire Brigade's chief, Steve Shaw, says residents and holidaymakers need to use common sense.
Just got to be conscious about how dry things are and don't go lighting campfires and bits and pieces. They're a big risk. We'll just get away and then they get hard to manage. So people just got to be careful.
A prohibited fire season has been declared in the area today, meaning fireworks and fires in the open air are banned. For Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
You are with Checkpoint. Coming up on the program, indications from the Finance Minister some programs may need to be changed or even cut if the government is to meet its targets and promises. A senior doctor at the Waikato DHB compares the disgraced former DHB chief Nigel Murray to mobster Al Capone. We have more on the Fonterra story. Katrina's about to lead the headlines with that, and we will look at it in depth afterwards. And the biggest story of the day, a New Zealand man appears in court after McDonald's refuses to serve him 200 chicken nuggets. It is a Friday night after all, and it is 26 minutes to 6 on that Friday night, which means it's headline time.
Fonterra's chair, John Wilson, is angry and disappointed over an international tribunal's ruling on the 2013 botulism scare that will cost the dairy company $183 million. The Singapore-based arbitration body backed the French food giant Danone's claim for compensation for damage to its business and lost earnings following Fonterra's recall of some dairy products. It was later found to be a false alarm. Senior doctors are accusing the Waikato District Health Board of wasting $15 million on a smartphone app. The comment follows new developments on the spending scandal engulfing the board. The State Services Commissioner has asked the Auditor-General to inquire into a DHB initiative which involved it paying $14.6 million to trial the American-based HealthTap mobile phone app. Families facing homelessness in a far north town say work and income is paying for them and their children to stay at a motel with blood-stained sheets and dogs roaming the property. They say the Awanui Motel and Hotel should be shut down as it's not safe. The Far North District Council says it's found problems with food hygiene and access to the pool, which need to be fixed by next week. Teenage girls have told researchers they consider it normal to be sent unwanted nude pictures of males and part of being a woman online. Researchers from the Ministry for Women and the internet safety group NetSafe interviewed 16 and 17-year-olds at secondary schools around the country. A man has drowned near Muriwai Beach. Emergency services were called to a person in trouble in the water at Māori Bay about 3:30 this afternoon. The police say the man was found dead in the water. And parts of Melbourne's north have experienced flash flooding, stopping trains as an intense band of rain moves over the city. Forecasters say an unprecedented amount of rain is expected to fall in Victoria over a 3-day period with falls of up to 300 millimetres. Those are the headlines. I'm back in 24 minutes.
Were you having a dig at me for the headlines being so late, Katrina?
No, not at all. I was just feeling hungry looking at all those yummy apricots.
Yes, they did look good, didn't they? Let's turn to this Fonterra story. A botulism scare, as Katrina was saying, has cost Fonterra $183 million, and New Zealand's largest company has slashed its forecast dividend as a result. It's been ordered in an arbitration process to pay the French food giant Danone for losses that occurred when it falsely thought botulism had made its way into powdered milk. The Danone infant formula brand Kauri Care had to recall 67,000 tonnes of formula, but says that was dwarfed by the damage to its reputation. We begin our coverage with Rowan Quinn looking at this.
Fonterra had wanted to pay just $11 million to Danone, saying that was what their supply agreement provided for in the case of a recall. But the Singapore-based arbitration panel disagreed. The decision was not sitting well with Fonterra's John Wilson.
As the chairman and as a farmer, I am angry and I am disappointed with the tribunal's decision that it does not fully recognise the terms of supply agreement that we had with Danone. However, we do accept their judgment and will now turn our attention to delivering the best possible return for our farmers despite this outcome.
Fonterra's cut its forecast dividend by 10 cents to between 35 and 45 cents a share, but it says the decision won't impact on the Farmgate milk forecast of $6.75 a kilo of milk solids. Mr Wilson's been gathering reactions from some farmer representatives.
It's frustration, but certainly what our farmers also recognise is how different the business is today. And really, like me, I think it would be fair to say it's a residual from what happened in 2013, rather so much from today.
The arbitration process is confidential, so it's not clear how much Danone had sought. Figures ranging between $300 million and $1 billion had been speculated on at the time. Fonterra's chief executive, Teo Spearings, says he doesn't know what Danone was seeking either, but has seen figures as high as $1.7 billion.
We are disappointed that the tribunal has not recognised the terms of the supply agreement between Fonterra and Danone, including the agreed limitations of liability. I know this news is disappointing, as John touched upon already, to our farmers and unit holders. However, as in most international arbitrations of this nature, it's very unlikely that there are options to challenge this decision.
Danone had also been suing Fonterra in the High Court, but the proceedings were halted for arbitration to occur. Mr Spearing says it's up to Danone to decide if that resumes. But he says he'd be keen to do business with Danone again, saying Fonterra's learned from its mistakes and is a stronger company since the scandal.
I am very much willing, based on that strength, to have commercial discussions rather than legal discussions.
And do you think that's likely, that they will want to do business with you?
I don't know. It's too early to say, but we need to have the door open, and we need always we need to act on the basis that we want to talk.
John Wilson says while $183 million is a big figure, Fonterra has big revenue and will work to minimise the impact it has on its books by the end of the financial year. More Checkpoint, call Rowan Quinn, DNA.
Well, our business editor Giles Beckford has been looking at the impact of the news on Fonterra and joins us now live from Wellington. Hi Giles, what do you make of all of this?
Well, first of all, I think we should note and see some perspective to it. $183 million, while it sounds a lot, we're talking about Fonterra, which is an $18 billion company. So from their point of view, it is a bit on the small side. Certainly, they've taken the hit to their forecast earnings. This is the extra money that they earn from their consumer commercial activities. That's the discretionary, flexible bit for them. So that's a sensible position for them. But they're a company that has between $300–400 million in cash at any one time. It has bank facilities. In other words, they can knock on the door of the banks and say, we want to borrow. And they have facilities close to $4 billion. So this is not going to hurt them in any significant way. It's an accounting measure, really. They'll put it down as a one-off item. They will look, Fonterra Spearing's told us in the press conference today, they will look at the opportunities to possibly recoup some of this money in terms of insurance policies and whether there's something there. I think the real damage for this is that it revives an episode that was damaging in a reputational sense for Fonterra. And it hurt them from the point of view that Danone, who had been a grand client of theirs, suddenly just cut the business. Just like that, they lost all those sales to Danone. Danone then went out and bought several businesses in New Zealand, and to a certain extent, it's been nibbling at Fonterra's lunch. It's actually gone and has been making infant formula locally and in conjunction with Chinese partners. So from that point of view, it hurts them there, and it's a continuing hurt. I think Fonterra Spearing is probably being a little hopeful to think they can resurrect the commercial relationship with Danone. And from the other point of view is that Fonterra's international competitors, the Nestle's of this world, the Lactatus and other big dairy companies, they can sort of say, well, look, Fonterra, this is a company that's just been done for nearly, well, more than 100 million euros as they all speak, because that's the currency that they're in. It's been done for a lot of money on an old thing. You can you really trust them? Do you think that you perhaps might like to do business with us instead?
Ooh.
So it's the reputational thing. It's another stick to beat them with. You know, I can fully understand that John Wilson and Fonterra Spearing's being quite adamant that this is old news. We draw a line under it, we go forward. It won't quite go away. It will linger there. I think the chances of being able to appeal, I think they're extremely limited. That's why they went to arbitration in the first place, because they didn't really want to go to court. It may cause them to rethink some of their commercial agreements. You hear quite a bit of disappointment there from John Wilson and Fonterra Spearing. They thought that the terms of their sales agreement with Danone meant that they would be liable for no more than $11 million if there was any particular incident, one single incident, or no more than $30 million in a year for any disruption to a supply agreement. Clearly that's been ripped up, not accepted by the arbitration panel. Perhaps that may lead to a rethink. I think for them, they've got bigger issues to worry about, in particular how they make further progress in China, which I have to say, it's central to their strategy, but by the same token, it's proving to be a very tough market for them to get themselves established in, especially with their partner, their being mate. So for Fonterra, it's costly, it's embarrassing, it's a little painful, an unhappy dream. Yes, they can put it past them, but the challenges for Fonterra still remain. The good thing for dairy farmers essentially is that the core earnings, that farm gate milk price, it's still intact, although at $6.75 a kilo of milk solids, which is the forecast at the moment, that's probably a little on the optimistic side. Most people have pulled themselves back to around $6.50, but for farmers, suppliers, at least they're not going to bear too much of the pain of this.
Thanks, Giles. How did the markets end the week?
Well, we thought the share market was going to crash through the 8,200 level. It did at one stage, that top 50 index, but it pulled its head in and it's finished just 2 points higher 8189. The New Zealand dollar, 68.3 euro cents and 90.3 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor. Have a fantastic weekend, Giles. Let's turn now to some more money. The Finance Minister has signalled some existing government programs or areas of spending may need to be changed or cut for the government to fulfil its financial promises. Government ministers have been directed to carry out a line-by-line review of spending within their portfolios and scrap any programs that don't fit with the government's priorities. Now, that move was revealed by Grant Robertson, who gave his first major speech as Finance Minister at an Auckland business breakfast today. And in the audience was our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Much of the political debate has been focused on Labour's economic credibility and whether it can balance the books while spending billions more on health, education and family incomes. Grant Robertson's speech was aimed at reassuring the business audience about the approach the coalition government intends to take.
The last Labour-led government, led by Helen Clark and Michael Cullen, showed that it is possible to be fiscally disciplined and deliver progressive policies, and we will do the same.
Mr Robertson said the government's coffers would be boosted by scrapping National's planned tax cuts and cracking down on tax evasion and property speculators.
But that will not be enough in itself. We will need to reprioritise and seek out programs that are good value for money. I have directed all ministers to assess their budgets against the new government's priorities.
He told reporters later this would be a 2-year process.
I think it's a good discipline for ministers to look at that, and obviously, that's what happens when governments change. There will be programs that, that are supported by one government that aren't supported by another one. But we want that process to be methodical. That's why I've asked ministers to do that right away and then take 2 years to go through the full process.
National's finance spokesperson Stephen Joyce says this justifies his party's questions during the election campaign about Labour's ability to balance the books.
Well, I think that would be a problem if they started cutting programs that New Zealanders rely on and which they hadn't mentioned during the election campaign. They have to be careful not to say, well, actually, we said before the election we could do all this, and now outside the fine print is that we have to cut some programs in order to achieve that.
Grant Robertson acknowledged economic growth may slow next year from its current level of around 2.5% as the housing market cools and immigration is tightened. But he says that won't compromise the government's budget.
Even if there's a slight softening of growth, we'll come back quickly. And actually, the bank economists who were forecasting that slight softening are all forecasting a rebound back up around 3% in 2019 and 2020. So I'm very confident we can meet our objective.
Mr Joyce says it's interesting the Finance Minister is already preparing New Zealanders for a slowdown.
Of course, that wasn't predicted in the settings coming up to the election. So if there is a slowdown, that will be predominantly because of the policy changes, restrictions on immigration and so on. And they have to own that because there's no reason why New Zealand shouldn't be tracking at around 3% growth.
Film producer John Barnett was in the audience for Grant Robertson's speech and he was pleased with what he heard.
I thought it was very coherent and I thought it was ambitious for the country and I thought that he joined the dots up very well and I do think that there's a vision.
But not all businesses seem happy with that vision. A key business confidence survey showed sentiment deteriorating to its lowest levels in 8 years this month, with the formation of the Labour-led government cited as one factor. Mr Barnett says there has naturally been some concern about the change of government within business.
Well, I think there always is when there's a change, because people get used to things and change is quite often hard to process. But what I have been interested to see is how many people are saying, oh, it's much better than I thought it was going to be.
Some of the questions from the audience were about how the government could meet skills shortages while tightening immigration. Andrew Fisher from EcoStock says his food waste recycling business, like most firms, needs a steady and reliable workforce.
I think they're now engaging with food manufacturers, transport companies and construction. Those three critical areas need truck drivers, machinery operators and builders. I think if you can talk to those areas and give confidence in those three areas around the farms, I think he didn't shut the door there. He left it open saying that they're going to talk through that, and I think that's important that those primary companies know that that level of investment can be continued.
The mini-budget, showing how all of the election promises and policies agreed in coalition talks will stack up, will be delivered on the 14th of December. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
A nationwide shortage of the country's most commonly prescribed contraceptive pill has some pharmacists worried they may have to start turning women away. The government's drug buying agency Pharmac has switched providers, but the old brand has run out before adequate supplies of the new version are on the shelves. Emma Hatton reports.
The contraceptive pill Ava 30ED is no longer funded by Pharmac and isn't available anymore. But stocks of its replacement, Levlin 30ED, which comes from a different supplier, are scarce. One Auckland pharmacist, Havina Moon, says they've been rationing Levlin to try to eke it out.
We've got so many people on it, I don't actually have that much anymore. We're only probably enough to maybe fill the next 4 or 5 prescriptions. When we ration it out, we're hoping that, at least they've got like a month's worth to keep them going, and then that gives, Pharmac or ProPharma a bit of time to maybe sort it out.
Ms Moon says they have let doctors know about the shortage so they can change the brand of contraceptive they prescribe, if that's possible. One customer, Hayley, went to pick up her pill prescription this morning and came away with just 1 month's worth instead of her normal 6-month supply. She says no one has been able to tell her when more stock will arrive or if it will come before her supply runs out.
Yeah, I was just like, oh wow, imagine if you were going away next week and, you can only get a month's supply. And she just said that it was a massive issue and that some other pharmacies were having the same problem. So it's not like she could get it from anywhere else. It was actually like a manufacturing issue or something.
The National Medical Advisor for Family Planning, Christine Roke, says it is rare for a shortage to occur.
It happens occasionally with medicines of various sorts. It's always a bit of a problem, and obviously this is a time of changing over from one medication to another, so that I suppose it's not surprising that there may not have been large amounts of the medication in the country.
Pharmac says in a statement that more Levlin stock has arrived in the country and the pill will be available at pharmacies next week. It says there's only been minimal disruption to customers. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
On the subject of drugs, new long-acting drugs may hold hope for millions of people who often suffer migraines. They're the first preventive medicines developed specifically for migraines. With more on this, here's the BBC's James Gallagher.
Tanya Dutton was just 11 when she started having devastating migraines. They interfere with her passion for music, causing immense pain for days, speech problems and blackouts. Tanya has to wear special glasses even indoors, as bright light can trigger an attack. They can be debilitating.
For me, it feels like someone is taking a knife and stabbing my head repeatedly. The pain is so bad that you can't open your eyes, you can't move, you can't speak.
Migraines are complex and poorly understood, but discovering what is changing in the brain is leading to new treatments. Scientists at King's College London have been investigating one chemical in the brain. It's been implicated in both the pain and sensitivity to light in migraine. Now, antibodies have been developed that neutralise that chemical to prevent an attack. Trials on 2 new antibodies have now been published. The first was on nearly 1,000 people. 50% of patients given the therapy had their migraines cut in half. A second antibody was tested on more than 1,100 people. It helped 41% of patients halve their migraines. It's hoped the drugs could give some patients their lives back.
These treatments are the first migraine-specific preventives ever for the most substantial neurological cause of disability on the planet. That is a huge advance for all of us.
For Tanya, that could mean freedom from the constant worry of a migraine attack.
To have a medication or a treatment that is specifically designed to help migraine is going to help a lot of people.
The drugs could be available next year if they are approved.
That report from the BBC. The White House press secretary has refused to confirm whether President Trump still has confidence in his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Sarah Huckabee Sanders told reporters the two men met twice at the White House today as they continued to implement the administration's agenda. A flurry of media reports earlier suggested there was a plan to remove Mr Tillerson in favour of the director of the CIA. Last month, Mr Tillerson failed to explicitly deny having called Mr Trump a moron. The BBC's Barbara Plett-Usher reports from Washington.
For quite a while, there's been a steady drumbeat of reports about tensions between the President and the Secretary of State. The two have certainly aired striking policy differences in public. Several times, Mr. Trump has undermined Mr. Tillerson's positions with his tweets. Rumours that he would be replaced have been circulating for months. Reports yesterday said the White House was now actively considering such a plan. And the President didn't do much to quell the speculation. Rex is here, he said when asked about it, hardly a ringing endorsement. Still, the White House said it had no personnel announcements to make, and the State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert said it was business as usual for Mr. Tillerson.
He has a big agenda. That agenda has certainly not changed. He remains the Secretary of State. As long as he is serving at the pleasure of the President, he will continue to do that job. Chief of Staff Kelly called our department this morning and said that the rumors are not true, that those reports are not true.
Despite the public differences, President Trump has quietly accepted Mr. Tillerson's diplomatic strategy on issues like North Korea. But the Secretary of State is unpopular in his department because of his management style and proposed staff and budget cuts. And he hasn't really learned to play the game of Washington politics, nor does he seem interested in doing so. The man touted to replace him, the CIA Director Mike Pompeo, plays it well. His positions are also much more in line with Mr. Trump's tough approach to national security.
That report from Barbara Plett-Usher with the BBC, of course. Authorities in Taranaki are investigating the poisoning of a pohutakawa planted by two Air Force veterans, a symbol of their friendship. In 1951, Eddie Hurley and Bob Begley planted the tree on their shared boundary at the historic Batch settlement of Tonga Porutu. But it's now been drilled into and left clinging to life. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin investigates.
Tonga Porutu is about 70 kilometres north of New Plymouth on State Highway 3 and best known for its access to the dramatic Three Sisters rock formation. It's also home to a cluster of 26 batches, some more than 100 years old, which are listed with Heritage New Zealand. The clapboard batches are recognised as being representative of a classic Kiwi lifestyle that is becoming increasingly rare. But Gillian Hurley says she got a nasty surprise when she visited the family batch this week.
We noticed one of the pohutakawas, we've got two on the property, and one of them had been poisoned and was slowly dying. And my partner Jeff had noticed that there were some holes in there in the tree, so we assumed poison must have been put into the pohutakawa.
Ms Hurley says her dad Eddie and Bob Begley drew ballots for the batches after the Second World War.
They built them in New Plymouth and sort of brought them out bit by bit over Mount Messenger out there back in that would have been the late 40s. And they planted that tree. In fact, there was two trees planted, but that one there was planted next door, sort of next door to their batch, and it was sort of as a symbol of their friendship.
Ms Hurley says the tree has been regularly trimmed and the family is at a loss to explain why anyone would want to kill it. Jenny Goddard is the chair of the Tonga Porutu Batch Leaseholders Association. She's taken aback at the apparent poisoning.
I'm appalled, absolutely appalled. We've got a really good community there, and I think we treasure that place incredibly dearly. And to think that someone's perhaps made a deliberate act of vandalism like this is really quite shocking.
Ms Goddard couldn't explain why someone would attack the tree, but says there have been issues with security at the batches.
When there were issues, things weren't stolen. It was really just more kind of crazy people breaking a window and getting in, but not actually taking anything. So just very disturbing, but not actually things being taken so much.
Out at Tonga Porutu, the few batch owners about were at a loss to explain the tree poisoning. Lloyd Magan has only had a batch at the settlement for about 12 months and is renovating. He's nonplussed at the tree incident.
Yeah, I don't know really, I don't live down that part, so I don't really have much to do with it, but no, I don't know. But yeah, there's no need for it to happen, is there? No, it's got nothing to do with me, so I'm not worried about it really.
Mike Brown's family has had a batch a few doors down from the Hurleys since the 1950s. He's worried.
Hey, that's pretty disconcerting from my point of view, to think that someone would deliberately kill a tree without discussion with the owners of it. It is lawlessness, and anything outside of the law is, as I said, it's a disconcerting factor.
Paul McEvoy was visiting the area with his wife Keita. He reckoned the culprit was probably close to home.
Actually, we find these ones here a different colour and they're quite unique. But why somebody would do that, it's only must be somebody who's disgruntled with it, I'd say.
The New Plymouth District Council, which manages the reserve, says it's looking into the incident and saddened that a pahurikawa has been targeted in this way. I Taranaki, mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Robin Martin aho.
Robin Martin does such a wonderful job of covering that region. That's a beautiful stretch of coastline if you don't know it. If you're driving from the north, you drive down through the King Country, you hit the coast at Awakino, and then you head along through Moko, get a white bait patty on a piece of white bread with butter dripping. Oh, it's damn good. And then Tonga Parutu. Oh, and then New Plymouth. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten aho. Senior doctors are accusing the Waikato District Health Board of wasting $15 million on a smartphone app. The comment follows new developments in the spending scandal engulfing the DHB that's led to the departure of its chief executive Nigel Murray and the resignation of the chair Bob Simcock. The State Services Commissioner, Peter Hughes, has asked the Auditor-General to inquire into a DHB initiative which involved it paying $14.6 million to trial the American-produced HealthTap mobile phone app. An Audit New Zealand review of the process, released separately, raised concerns including over a lack of open tendering. Ian Powell of the Senior Doctors Union says the findings are damning. The DHB says the money spent on HealthTap has not been wasted. Meanwhile, the Health Minister David Clark says the combined budget blowout at the country's 20 district health boards is now likely to top $150 million, triple what was projected 6 months ago. Mr Clark told Checkpoint DHBs didn't have finalised budgets until 2 weeks before the financial year began. He says when the new government took power, not a single DHB had its annual plan signed off.
It's put those DHBs in a difficult position because they're months behind on their planning, and the deficit expectations have been growing the whole time because they haven't had the certainty, and also after 9 years of being squeezed under the previous government, there's not many more efficiency gains that can be made easily.
David Clark says the last official deficit projection was back in May when it was $47.5 million. He's now expecting deficits north of $150 million. A botulism scare has cost Fonterra $183 million, forcing the country's biggest company to cut its forecast dividend. A Singapore-based arbitration tribunal has ordered the cooperative to pay the French food giant Danone for losses that occurred when it falsely thought its powdered milk had been contaminated. Fonterra chair John Wilson is angry and disappointed over the ruling. The company has cut its earnings forecast range by 10 cents a share, though it left the milk price, which its farmers depend on, untouched. Danone is also suing Fonterra in the High Court, but the case was halted while the arbitration took place. The government will soon allow state house tenants to keep pets. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, set out the government's priorities at a meeting in the Salvation Army Church in Auckland today. Mr Twyford says he's committed to being a good landlord for state house tenants and allowing people to live with dignity. He says pets can be important to people's quality of life and should be allowed as long as they're not a nuisance or dangerous to neighbours.
Now that doesn't mean it's open season for pit bull terriers and vicious dogs. I have no truck with people who don't properly care for their pet. Dogs that bark all night or that bite people or whatever, I have no tolerance for that. But if dogs are well behaved and properly looked after, why shouldn't tenants be able to keep them?
Phil Twyford says he's still working out the details with Housing New Zealand. Young mothers facing homelessness in a far north town say work and income is paying for them and their children to stay at a motel with blood-stained sheets and dogs roaming the property. Families who have stayed at the Awanui Motel and Hotel say it should be shut down as it's not safe. Tash Williams was 8 months pregnant when Work and Income suggested she and her 17-month-old son stay at a motel near Kaitaia earlier this year. She complained about the motel's conditions, including filthy bathroom and kitchen facilities, but says the agency told her there was nowhere else they could send her. The Far North District Council says it has reviewed the motel and found problems with food hygiene and access to the pool, which need to be fixed by next week. Teenagers have told researchers there is little useful help or support for them dealing with online harm. Researchers from the Ministry for Women and Internet Safety Group NetSafe interviewed 16 and 17-year-olds at secondary schools around the country. The report finds all of the students knew someone who had suffered serious digital harm. Teenage girls also told researchers they consider it normal to be sent unwanted nude pictures of males and part of being a woman online. NetSafe's Chief Executive Martin Cocker is advising parents to talk to their children about their online lives.
If you're close to your child and you're talking to them about their life online, you'll probably notice if there's a change of attitude towards it. And that's probably the key thing. But if you weren't already having that conversation, it'd be very difficult to know if something has suddenly happened.
Martin Cocker of NetSafe. A reservoir in Napier will be chlorinated from today after E. coli was detected in its water. The City Council says a low reading of the bacteria was found at the Otago Reserve, which supplies water to 200 homes. It also feeds a tap at Taranaki Reserve, and that's being turned off as a precaution. Until today, the water had remained untreated because hand dosing is the only way to chlorinate it. The Council's Director of Infrastructure, John Kingsford, says the Council is taking precautions while it figures out the source of the E. coli. He says testing done at different points along the network came back negative, showing the bacteria is contained to one area. It's 6:05. To sport, and the West Indies have claimed the wicket of New Zealand opener Tom Latham late on the first day of the first cricket test in Wellington. Latham was caught on 37 after he mistimed a pull shot. Kane Williamson was then dismissed for 1 run. A short time ago, the Black Caps were 68 for 2. French Open doubles champion Michael Venus and his new partner will play together for the first time at the ASB Classic in Auckland next month. Venus and Ryan Harrison have confirmed their split, so the American can concentrate on his singles career. The New Zealander's new partner is South African Raven Klaasen. They played together many years ago on the Futures Tour.
I think we match up well. We've practiced together a few times and get on really well. So, I mean, all the pieces are there. It's just a matter of putting the puzzle together. And sometimes it all works on paper and doesn't really eventuate playing together. So you don't know until you try these things, so we're going to give it a crack and hopefully things work out. Michael Venus.
The New Zealand women's sevens team take on the United States in this evening's quarter-finals at the opening leg of the World Series in Dubai. And player Kayla McAllister says they're keeping it simple after going through pool play unbeaten. The Black Ferns convincingly beat the Americans in pool play, and McAllister says their aim is to continue building on that form to reach the Final Four.
Just what we've been working on, just doing the basics well, shifting the ball left to right and wide and just creating space for each other and getting over the white line.
Kayla McAllister, that's the news.
Tomorrow morning, the Rorschach blot test. Invented by Rorschach, obviously. Damien Searles says he's unfairly unsung. Dr. Don Brash on why using te reo on te radio is virtue signalling at its worst. And Owen King on co-authoring a big fat novel with his father, Stephen, about the ignorance and stupidity of men. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning on RNZ National.
That sounds like a good show. Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, except South Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty, cloudy periods with isolated showers. South Auckland to Whanganui, including the central high country, scattered showers mainly during the afternoons and evenings, some thundery with localised downpours and hail. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine apart from afternoon and evening showers about the ranges, some possibly thundery. Manawatu to Wellington, mainly fine, isolated showers about the ranges today. Cloudy periods tomorrow morning and evening with drizzle possible. Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine, isolated afternoon and evening showers, mostly about the ranges where they could be thundery today. Buller and Westland, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Fiordland, patchy drizzle. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, isolated showers today, mainly inland, some heavy and possibly thundery about Otago. Fine tomorrow, but some cloud about Stewart Island and the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
And your earrings are the test pattern.
Yeah, they are. See?
They're fantastic. They're really, people, the youngsters will know what the test pattern looks like.
We're having a conversation today.
Charlie just goes 24 hours a day
Exactly.
now.
Good night, Kiwi, in the test pattern.
Brilliant. I don't know that they're missing terribly much on the test pattern, and your earrings more than make up for it, but yeah, wonderful. A senior doctor at Waikato Hospital has compared disgraced former DHB Chief Executive Nigel Murray to mobster Al Capone, saying while he's been investigated for his spending, it was his mismanagement of the DHB that was his biggest problem. Dr. Margot Rumble, a specialist anaesthetist at Waikato Hospital and chair of the senior medical staff there, says Mr. Murray only met with Waikato Hospital's chief medical officer once a year instead of the recommended once a week. Yes, you heard correctly, once a year. And when things got dire at the start of winter this year, when doctors realised they were 50 beds short and flu season was around the corner, Dr. Rumble says Dr. Murray laughed. And all of this came after doctors wrote to the board chair, Bob Simcock, who's now resigned but was responsible for hiring Mr. Murray, or Dr. Murray, saying they had significant concerns because Dr. Murray's relationship with doctors was, quote, poor. Bob Simcock told them their concerns were unfounded. We now know, of course, they weren't. Dr. Margot Rumble told Zach Fleming her worst fears came true.
We had concerns about Murray right from the beginning, and it'd be fair to say that he realised all our negative expectations. Yeah. They say that so he's been done for expenses. They say that they got Al Capone for tax evasion and not for murder. For us, the biggest issue has clearly been the mismanagement. The DHB was not performing as it should. We had lost accreditation in obstetrics and gynaecology. We'd had threatened loss of accreditation in orthopaedics and paediatrics, and the intern supervision was under review by the Medical Council. So we could see that quite basic levels of performance were not occurring within the Waikato Hospital, which is our predominant focus. We could see that a lot of patients were requiring surgery to be performed outside the hospital because we weren't being resourced properly within the theatre. We could see that patients were being treated in areas that weren't fit for purpose, and we knew that the delays in ED were not resolving. There was frequent activation of the full capacity.
And all of this
protocol.
Is happening meanwhile the chief executive is overseas for more than half of the year. And
well, we don't have any view or insight into where he is. Our focus is purely on patient safety and performance. We're here to serve the public and serve the patients in the best way that we can. The responsibility for the oversight and supervision of the CEO is the board chair. His responsibility is to appoint the CEO, and our perspective was that he was a controversial appointment. None of his direct reports were clinicians from this hospital. So we already had a pretty clear indicator that our relationship between the clinicians and the CEO was unlikely to be functional. His closest working relationship should be with the Chief Medical Officer, and he met with him 3 times during his tenure, which is extraordinary. The current situation that we've got at the moment, our interim CEO, who has the full support of the senior doctors, will have regular meetings already with the clinicians. On a weekly basis, he will be meeting with these senior clinicians, taking advice and guidance and looking for solutions. Nigel Murray did turn up to one of our meetings in April. The clinicians had reviewed the bed plan for winter and noticed that it was 50 beds short, and crucially there were 10 beds short in critical care, and that's a lot. And we pointed this out to the Chief Executive as a clinical governance concern, and he laughed and he said, well, let's hope it's not going to be a bad flu season like it was in the Northern Hemisphere. So that was his response to what we would regard as a crucial clinical situation, and it was a bad flu season. and we did cancel patients frequently.
People could have died, right?
And I can tell you, every patient that had a cancelled operation, none of them laughed.
Dr. Margot Rumble says in the 1 month the new interim chief executive, Derek Wright, has been in charge at the DHB, things have already noticeably improved. Now, while Zach Fleming was in Waikato Hospital speaking to Dr. Rumble, he asked visitors and patients what they thought of Nigel Murray's misspending and mismanagement and what they thought should happen. The majority want him brought before the courts, while some believe the fact he will probably never be hired in an executive position again is punishment enough.
Doesn't make you sick though, mate.
It does. It is. It's just total greed and thinking it's a shame because we've been to this hospital a lot of times and I feel that it's a very good hospital, and to have someone at the top like that ripping it off, it's wrong.
If that was me or you or Joe Bloggs down the road, we'd be hauled before the courts, in jail. No, he's got to be accountable. And some cock too.
I guess losing his job and probably struggling to get another similar sort of job is punishment. It lacks a bit of moral fibre, I would suggest.
It's pretty disgusting from taxpayers who, we pay our taxes and we expect good service. Sad, actually. That money could have been spent well. ED, the emergency rooms are always, understaffed and they're pretty run off their feet down there. So, could have been spent much better.
People in and around Waikato Hospital talking to our reporter Zach Fleming. In a moment we're going to look at Kauri dieback, but before that, myrtle rust has been spotted in Wellington and gardeners expect its relentless spread will accelerate over the warm summer months. The Ministry for Primary Industry says the fungal disease's wide geographical reach is likely to signal a change in their tactics to fight it. Emile Donovan reports.
Myrtle rust was first spotted in New Zealand in May on a property in Northland. Since then it's spread to much of the North Island, affecting properties in Taranaki, Waikato, Bay of Plenty and Auckland, and now the capital. MPI's Myrtle Rust Response Coordinator Catherine Duthie says the latest discovery was unexpected.
We had thought that maybe there was an off chance we could have this disease contained to the Taranaki and Te Puke regions. Wellington is a bit of a surprise and very disappointing. It's a lot cooler down in Wellington than myrtle rust really likes, but we've had a lot of warm weather recently.
Myrtle rust is an airborne fungus which can spread far and wide in a very short period of time. It can lie dormant for months on end as the fungus only shows up in relatively high temperatures between 15 and 25 degrees. And the Chief Executive of the Plant Producers Association, Matthew Dolan, says that means we might have only seen the tip of the iceberg so far.
It is likely that the spread of the disease is going to start to accelerate as temperatures warm up, and MPI are aware of this. It is a case of moving into a long-term management plan for this disease, like many other plant diseases over time that we manage.
Mr Dolan says myrtle rust is probably already in lots of places around the country, but could be lying low.
We've always suspected that myrtle rust has been widespread through New Zealand. It's just a case of it exhibiting itself and the disease growing. It's possible that it is already in the South Island, it's just that it hasn't exhibited itself because it takes warm temperatures and climatic conditions for the disease to start to exhibit.
The disease infects members of the myrtle plant family with a rust-like fungus, varying in colour from golden yellow to dark brown. The myrtle family includes native trees like pohutakawa, rata, manuka and ramarama. However, John Rawcliffe from the UMF Honey Association says overseas evidence suggests manuka, and hence the lucrative manuka honey industry, probably won't be badly affected.
Our best reference is what's happened in Australia. In Australia, they have myrtle rust, and the indications are at the moment it's had very limited, if any, impact on the plant, Leptospinus scoparium, which we call in New Zealand manuka.
Catherine Duthie says the disease's spread is a sign that myrtle rust could be here to stay, and MPI may have to switch its focus from eradication to management.
So we're putting our efforts now into thinking about research, into thinking about host resistance, and trying to eliminate it still locally where we can while we still do have a chance.
Dr Duthie says MPI will have to develop a broader strategy to deal with myrtle rust if it continues to spread throughout the country. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Emile Donovan tēnei.
Let's stay with trees and things ailing. The moves to keep people out of Auckland's Waitakere ranges to stop Kauri dieback completely wiping out trees in the area have been dealt. A blow. Council officials are recommending councillors vote to keep the 16,000 hectare park open when they make a decision on the matter on Tuesday. The tangata whenua of the rangers, Te Kauri Maki, is placing a rahui or cultural prohibition on entering the park at an early morning ceremony tomorrow. They're urging councillors to ignore the advice of officials and vote to keep people out of the ranges. Our reporter Rowan Quinn spoke to the iwi's executive manager Edward Ashby, who says its rahui is about sending a message about the right thing to do.
One thing I can say is, this isn't about, fining people when they go into the bush. This isn't about people with, black singlets and folded arms standing at the entrances to tracks. There's been a bit of misinformation put out by certain members of council around, for example, that it's going to be barriers and guards and that it's going to suck up all the money that would be put into track upgrades. That's simply not true. The enforcement side of it is an element that would have to involve the central government through a controlled area notice, really, to be practical. But closure and what we're talking about is spiritual and physical, and we would hope that that council could step away from the 100% compliance enforcement sort of mentality, and simply, even just messaging that, hey, this forest is sick, and tourists coming, people coming to visit, it would be good if you didn't actually go in there while we actually do the work to upgrade it, do boardwalks, do dry paths, etc.
The council have just put out their agenda for the meeting on Tuesday, and in it the officials are recommending that they vote not to close the park and to just have more track closures. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm glad that it's only a recommendation at this point. To put it on the record, I think that those councillors and those members in that committee that made that recommendation, it would be wise of them to read Council's own June 2017 report on the matter. The very last recommendation of that report by the scientists, because we've heard them talk about, the scientists tell us it can't be done, blah, blah, blah. That report itself, which is a council report, the last recommendation advises that an independent inquiry into closing the forest be set up urgently, and that in the scientists' opinion and in the authors of that report, in their opinion, that may be the only way to control the spread of Kauri dieback, both in and inside the forest, but also from that forest to other areas. So I don't know what scientists Penny Holson and other councillors have been listening to, but they're certainly not the ones that wrote their own report.
Te Kauri Maki's Edward Ashby talking to our senior reporter Rowan Quinn. After months of blood, sweat and tears, the New Zealand Women's Rugby League team are just one win away from reclaiming the World Cup. We're not tempting fate by saying just one win. The Kiwi Ferns take on Australia in the final in Brisbane tomorrow before the men's final between the Kangaroos and England. New Zealand are the #1 women's side in the world, but as Matt Chatterton reports, the Kiwi Ferns are going to the match as underdogs, and actually they're reasonably happy about that.
On the outside, the skipper gives it on to Honey Hiramiji. She's got a fend on her. Hiramiji! Try number 12 coming up. You're kidding. Oh, no! Give it to the skipper, Laura Mariu, who puts it down behind the uprights. And New Zealand books a berth in the World Cup final for 2017.
The three-time world champion Kiwi Ferns are hungry to win back the trophy their opponents Australia took from them back in 2013. This year's World Cup campaign started back in May when New Zealand played Australia in their annual Anzac Test. Australia won the match comfortably, which is why they're going into tomorrow's game as the favourites. However, Kiwi Ferns coach Tony Benson says his side's come a long way since that loss.
It's been difficult to get to this level, but the games that we've played so far, we've had 20-minute periods where we've had less than 30% possession, and for about 40% completion is the highest. And in the second half we go out and we have 100% completion and 60-odd% of the ball. So when we string two good halves together, we're going to be very dangerous.
New Zealand and Australia have earned their spots in tomorrow's final. Between them, they've only let in 4 tries while scoring 458 points over 8 games. One of the Kiwi Ferns' not-so-secret weapons is wing Hani Hirimi. She's the tournament's leading scorer with 11 tries. Hirimi has played in 3 World Cups, including 2008, when New Zealand beat Australia in the final. With all that experience, Hirimi is a wealth of knowledge for the younger players in her side who are about to embark in their first World Cup final.
For me, it's about just getting them to acknowledge those emotions and accept them, but embrace them, embrace the pressure when you're out there and you know that pressure's coming. Embrace it, don't shy away from it. Feel what you're feeling, but then be ready for it and attack it with that true Kiwi kind of mongrel that we have.
With the New Zealand men's team failing so badly, crashing out of the quarterfinals against Fiji, the Kiwi Ferns feel a responsibility to appease the New Zealand's rugby league community, according to Coach Benson.
They're very, very proud Kiwis, every single one of them, and there's nothing they want more than to bring a cup home to New Zealand, and that'll be for our Kiwi men as well. We supported them right through, and this is the least we can do is do our job and bring something home.
Tomorrow night's match kicks off at 6:45, while the men's final between Australia and England starts at 10 p.m. For Checkpoint, Matt Chatterton.
6:24. Paul McCartney is about to start a rare Australasian tour. The 75-year-old's first tour to our neck of the woods in more than 20 years is kicking off in Perth. The ABC's David Webber reports McCartney has admitted he's amazed his career has lasted this long.
He may be getting on in years, but when he's on stage, Paul McCartney is as energetic as a schoolboy. If the singing voice is a little deeper, the accent is unmistakable.
It's a kind of magical thing, because when you write a song, you've got nothing, and you suddenly produce like a rabbit from a hat, and it feels really good, and you get a bit addicted to that feeling, and then you perform it with an audience, and you get addicted to that too.
Sir Paul held court at the Regal Theatre in Subiaco, where fans were invited to ask questions before a few journalists were allowed to sneak a few in. He suggested he didn't suspect he'd still be in demand in the 1970s, let alone when he was in his 70s.
It's something that's a surprise, really, because we didn't realise it was going to last this long. Sgt. Pepper's is 50 years old this year. And, we had no idea that it was going to last even more than 10 years.
Sir Paul spoke of his memory of arriving to the massive crowd in Adelaide in 1964. He talked about the first dog he owned, Martha, and gave a little advice to a 9-year-old who said he wanted to change the world. He found himself reflecting on the wide range of ages in his audiences.
It's a great feeling, and I've seen some lovely things at shows. I remember one in Brazil where there was a dad, obviously a tall guy with a beard, and he's got this beautiful young girl with him, and she's looking up at him, I'm doing Let It Be, and he's looking down on her. It was a real sort of beautiful family moment, and it's a choker, because I've got to sing this thing and not cry.
For this road veteran, the experience of touring has definitely changed for the better since those heady days of Beatlemania.
It got a bit much, because in the end we couldn't really hear what we were doing, and that's one of the big differences now. We can go louder than the audience now. I'm older, the audience is older. We've got dads and sons, dads and daughters, all people of different ages in the family. That's very different. It really was pretty much just screaming girls.
Paul McCartney has promised to deliver career highlights because he believes that's what the audience wants. He said the idea is based on his own experiences of spending hard-earned pocket money on disappointing shows.
If I was going to our show, what would I want to see them do? And that's the start of the list, and then we go through it and we put in some songs that we would like to do that people might not necessarily know. But it's basically to please the audience, and I'm not ashamed to say that, because they pay good money to come to the show.
After Perth, Sir Paul McCartney plays in Melbourne, Brisbane and Sydney, and will be in New Zealand by the middle of the month.
That report from the ABC. We're going to end tonight with something else from across the ditch. A drunk driver who abused McDonald's staff for refusing to serve him 200 chicken McNuggets has appeared in a Sydney court today. The peckish New Zealander Cole Olsen drove to a Macca's drive-through in Thornley in North Sydney and demanded to be served the 200 nuggets. And then he described himself in court today as a vegan. Channel 7's Evan Batten, who clearly got the short straw on the assignment desk today, met up with Mr Olsen outside court this morning.
There was a moment when Cole Olsen decided he needed nuggets and lots of them. 200 to be exact.
Cole, what were you doing with all those nuggets?
It was just before 5 a.m, Remembrance Day, and the 30-year-old IT worker was about to do something he'd much rather forget.
What do you want to say to the staff at Macca's?
When the heavily intoxicated vegan went to the Thornley Macca's drive-through, they refused to serve him nuggets because they weren't on the breakfast menu.
Are you really vegan? I mean, if you'd ordered the nuggets, you can't be vegan, right?
Olsen had drunk so much the night before he wasn't taking no for an answer, passing the drive-through 3 times, abusing staff. I want my nuggets. I'm going to you all up. On the 4th lap, he changed his order to hash browns, again ordering 200. Staff gave him the hash browns, locked the doors and called police. He blew .175, 3.5 times the limit.
You can kind of see why the magistrate described it as crazy, bizarre and completely out of control behaviour, and also why he insisted that Olsen must have been more than just very drunk, but also on drugs or suffering mental health issues.
Pleading guilty to high-range drink driving today, his licence was cut for 9 months. He's on a 12-month bond and was fined $1,000, making it one very expensive Macca's run.
Evan Batten reporting. We'd like to thank our friends at Channel 7 for that item, which ends Checkpoint for the week. On behalf of our really excellent and hard-working team, thank you for being with us tonight and throughout the week. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will be back Monday at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Senior doctors are accusing the Waikato District Health Board of wasting $15 million on a smartphone app. The 2013 botulism scare has cost Fonterra $183 million in damages to a French company, forcing it to cut its forecast dividend. A national outbreak of whooping cough has been declared by the Ministry of Health. The government will soon allow State House tenants to keep pets. Families facing homelessness in a far north town say work and income is paying for them and their children to stay at a motel with blood-stained sheets and dogs roaming the property. And parts of Melbourne have experienced flash flooding as an intensive band of rain moves over the city. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Country Life this week is out on the farm with an award-winning cheesemaker and her delightful herd of goats.
Pets aren't always a bonus. One of the